Okay, so you ever just lay in bed and like think about those weird movies playing out in your head every single night? Dreams, right. They seem so totally random and then they just vanish. Like where do they go? But you know what? Turns out they're actually like this secret passage leading straight into some of the biggest like mind-blowing puzzles in all of philosophy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're talking about those questions that really keep philosophers tossing and turning. And it all starts, kind of ironically, with our nights.
Exactly. It's like a head-spinning inception thing. So get ready for some serious mind bending because for this deep dive we went deep into this incredible resource, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on, you guessed it, dreams and dreaming.
And what's so amazing is how this topic, dreams, it seems simple on the surface, but it really touches on pretty much every corner of philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you think about it, it's got epistemology, that's how we know what's real, right? And it's got ethics, what we think is right and wrong, and even ontology, which is like the very nature of what exists.
And it doesn't even stop there. It gets tangled up with the philosophy of mind and even cognitive science.
It's a whole universe of ideas.
Oh yeah, it's huge. So our goal today is to pull out the most mind-blowing, philosophically juicy bits from this encyclopedia entry. We want to give you a new way of looking at these nightly mental adventures and how they make us question everything. We're talking about our beliefs, about reality, about knowledge, about who we even are, and even what consciousness itself is. Forget those dream dictionaries telling you a snake means betrayal. Okay, we're going way deeper. So let's start with a classic philosophical head scratcher: dreams and skepticism.
Perfect. Because when philosophers start thinking about dreams, they almost always end up at this problem of skepticism, especially the version made famous by Descartes. He basically used how vivid dreams can be to question, if we can even trust our senses.
Right. Like that feeling of sitting in your chair listening to this, that feels totally real, right?
Exactly. And Descartes pointed out, you can have that same experience in a dream, even while you're actually asleep in bed. And that led him to a very unsettling question. How can we really know that our whole life isn't just one super long, super convincing dream?
So that's what they call the always dreaming doubt, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then there's an even more immediate problem, the now dreaming doubt. How do you right now know for sure that you're not dreaming?
It feels real. I mean, right now feels real, but so do dreams a lot of the time.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
And even if most of what our senses tell us is accurate, the fact that we could be dreaming at any moment really messes with our ability to say we actually know anything for sure.
There's always this little voice in the back of your head saying, what if this is all just a dream?
Exactly. And the Stanford Encyclopedia actually lays out this skeptical argument from dreaming very clearly.
Like step by step.
Yeah. It basically says, if you know something, there can't be any good reason to doubt it. But the fact that you could be dreaming right now, that is a real reason to doubt what your senses are telling you. So you can't really know anything for sure based on your senses, not right now.
It's like you can't trust your senses if they might be tricking you into thinking you're awake when you're not. Take the sound of our voices right now.
Right. If you were dreaming, you could hear those voices crystal clear, but they wouldn't be real.
Mind blown. But wait, Descartes, he was the one who came up with all this doubt, right?
Yeah.
Didn't he try to find a way out of it?
He did. It's kind of funny. He spends a lot of time making us doubt everything, and then he tries to pull us back from the brink.
So how did he do that?
Well, he said that even if we're dreaming, there are some things we can still know for sure. Things like mathematical truths. 2 + 3 = 5 no matter what. That's true whether you're awake or asleep. He called these truths of reason. He said they're so clear and distinct in our minds that they don't depend on our senses, which can be tricky.
So even in the craziest dream, basic logic and math still hold up. That's kind of reassuring.
It is.
But it's interesting because the encyclopedia also points out that Descartes wasn't the first philosopher to bring up dreams and skepticism. Like the idea's been around for ages.
Oh, yeah. You've got Plato way back in ancient Greece talking about how dreams and illusions can mess with our perception. And then you have the Pyrrhonists, who were, these hardcore skeptics who basically use dreams as just one more example of how our senses can lead us astray.
Like they weren't just focused on dreams, they were skeptical about everything.
Pretty much. And much later, you have Augustine and Montaigne both struggling with what dreams mean for our understanding of reality.
It's a pretty common theme, right?
Yeah, Augustine thought we could at least look back and tell the difference between dreams and waking life.
Yeah.
Montaigne, on the other hand, he actually found illusions in waking life even more troubling than those in dreams.
So if all these philosophers were already talking about dreams and skepticism, what made Descartes' version so influential? Like, what made it stick?
Well, I think it's a few things. First, Descartes really went all in on this idea of dream skepticism. He devoted a huge chunk of his work to exploring it. Like, he made it a central problem that we have to address. And then he wrote in this very personal, engaging style. Like, you're right there with him as he's wrestling with these doubts. It's not just some abstract, academic treatise.
He makes it feel real.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the fact that he himself had these incredibly vivid dreams as a young man. And many scholars think those experiences really shaped his philosophical ideas.
It's like his own personal life fed into his work.
Exactly. So for Descartes, this idea that we could be constantly tricked by dreams, it wasn't just some intellectual exercise. It was a real threat to how we understand the world.
A real and pretty terrifying threat. Now, the encyclopedia compares dream skepticism to other famous skeptical scenarios, like the evil genius and the brain in a vat.
Right.
How do dreams, how do they measure up against those?
That's a great question. The thing about the evil genius and the brain in a vat is that they're usually presented as these hypothetical situations, like one-time things, but dream deception, that's something we all experience all the time.
Regularly.
Yeah, exactly. The evil genius is this made-up character. And while the brain in a vat, that's possible, dreams are actually happening every night.
Right.
But the evil genius scenario takes things even further. It makes us question even those basic truths of reason that Descartes said we could still rely on.
So even math is up for grabs with the evil genius.
Yeah, and unlike the now dreaming doubt, the evil genius suggests this possibility of being trapped in a total illusion permanently.
Okay, so a bit more intense than just dreaming.
Yeah. And then you have the brain in a vat idea, which is kind of like a modern version of the evil genius. And the Matrix movies really play with this concept. It's all about these simulated experiences that feel so real you can't tell they're not.
Right. But in the Matrix, even within that simulated world, there are glitches and people can bend the roles. And that kind of reminds me of how weird and illogical dreams can be.
Absolutely. And the philosopher Andy Clark, back in 2005, he argued that the Matrix actually blends these two types of skepticism really cleverly. It combines this industrial strength deception where everything feels just like waking life with that kind of warped logic and weirdness we often see in dreams.
So it kind of blurs the lines between these different skeptical ideas. Okay, so back to Descartes. He painted this picture of dream skepticism, but he also tried to escape it. So what was his solution? How did he get out of that trap?
Well, near the end of his sixth meditation, he proposes this thing called a coherence test.
A coherence test.
Yeah. Basically, he noticed that our waking experiences, they tend to connect in a way that makes sense. We can usually remember where things came from, where they happened, and they fit into the story of our lives. Dreams, on the other hand, they're often all jumbled and fragmented. Characters appear and disappear for no reason. The laws of physics don't work properly.
Dreams are like a movie edited by a 5-year-old.
Exactly. So for Descartes, this overall coherence, this logic and consistency, that becomes a way to tell waking life from dreaming.
Okay. So if it makes sense, it's probably real life. If it's totally bonkers, it might be a dream.
Right. But even back then, people pointed out some problems with this coherence test. Thomas Hobbes, another philosopher, said, what if you dream of passing the coherence test?
Whoa, a dream within a dream, kind of?
Yeah, like a dream that feels perfectly logical and consistent, and then you wake up and it was all just a dream. And another critic, Pierre Bourdain, he worried that even within dreams, we might think we're being clear and logical when we're not.
So our dream cells might be tricked into thinking they're being rational.
Exactly. So even though many dreams are weird and jumbled, the possibility of having a super realistic, super coherent dream that throws a wrench into Descartes' attempt to beat skepticism.
Okay, so the coherence test has some holes.
Yeah.
But there's been research on how strange dreams are, and that actually backs up some of what Descartes said.
Right. Studies have shown that dreams are often illogical and disjointed.
But then the question becomes, for philosophers anyway, how much should we rely on science and actual data when we're talking about these big philosophical arguments?
That's a key point. One philosopher, Grundmann, in 2002, he suggested an introspective criterion for telling if we're awake. He argued that our ability to think critically, to really reflect on things, is a good sign that we're not dreaming.
Okay.
The idea is that in dreams, our reasoning abilities are usually turned down low or even switched off.
Like our brains are on autopilot in dreamland.
Kind of. But then again, even after waking up, people sometimes still think a really vivid dream was real.
So even if we think we're being critical, we might not be.
Exactly.
Hmm.
So, for some people, and in some situations, dream deception is a real problem, even if most dreams are weird and nonsensical.
So even with all of Descartes' efforts, dream skepticism is still this big, unsolved problem in philosophy. It makes us question whether we can ever be truly certain about anything we experience.
Absolutely. It's one of those enduring philosophical puzzles.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit now and dive into another fundamental question. What are dreams, really? I mean, what's going on in our minds when we dream?
Right. So when philosophers talk about this, they're talking about the ontology of dreams. Ontology is basically the study of what exists and what it means for something to exist.
Okay, so are dreams things that really exist?
That's the question. And when we're talking about dreams existing, we're talking about them as experiences. Like, do we really have sensations, thoughts, and feelings when we dream, or is it just something else entirely?
Most people would probably say, yeah, dreams are experiences. We remember seeing things, feeling emotions, the whole 9 yards.
Right. But there's this really interesting kind of radical philosophical view that says dreams aren't experiences.
Really?
Yeah. It's an argument made by Norman Malcolm back in the 1950s. It's not widely accepted today, but it was really influential for a while.
Okay, so what did he say?
Basically, Malcolm said that our whole idea of dreaming comes from what people tell us after they wake up, not from anything that's actually happening in their minds during sleep.
So he thought dreams were just stories we tell ourselves after the fact.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He said someone who's in a deep sleep, they can't be having any kind of conscious experience.
So the dream report, that's all we have to go on.
Right. And he even pointed out that the way we talk about dreams is different from how we talk about waking experiences. Like, we say, in my dream, I was flying, but we wouldn't say, in my real life, I was flying, unless we actually were.
It's like a different way of using language.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he thought that means we're not actually having those experiences during sleep. We're just using language differently to describe them. He even dismissed evidence from science, like REM sleep.
So he wasn't too keen on scientific explanations.
No. He thought that using things like brain activity to define dreams would change what we even mean by dreaming.
So for him, it was all about the words, the concepts.
Pretty much. But a lot of philosophers disagreed with him. They said he was being too strict with his view of what counts as meaningful evidence. And his view led to some weird conclusions, like the idea that there could be no objective proof of dreams, only people's subjective reports.
Right. But what about all the scientific findings about, REM sleep and brain activity during dreams?
Exactly. Some philosophers argue that Malcolm was basically claiming he had access to these deep truths about the meaning of words that most people wouldn't even recognize.
Okay. So pretty controversial.
Yeah.
But the mainstream view among philosophers today is that dreams are experiences. What's the evidence for that?
There's actually quite a bit. First, there's the discovery of REM sleep, which happened in the 1950s. It turns out that when we're in REM sleep, our brain activity looks a lot like when we're awake. Our eyes move around quickly, but our muscles are basically paralyzed.
So our minds are active, but our bodies are still.
Exactly. And people who are woken up during REM sleep, they report having dreams much more often than people woken up from other stages of sleep. And those dreams tend to be more vivid and intense.
So that paralysis is important, right?
Yeah. It might be why we don't act out our dreams even when they're really active or even violent.
It's like a safety mechanism.
Right. Our minds are running wild, but our bodies are, on lockdown. Then there's lucid dreaming. That's when you become aware that you're dreaming while you're in the dream.
So you know it's not real.
Yeah. And some people can even control their dreams when they're lucid. And scientists have been able to verify lucid dreaming in the lab. Lucid dreamers can use prearranged eye movements to signal that they're aware they're dreaming, and these signals can be recorded.
Wow. So it's like sending a message from inside the dream world.
Exactly. And that shows us that conscious experience is definitely happening during dreams. And then there's dream enactment behavior. This happens in people with a sleep disorder called REM sleep behavior disorder. Basically, they don't have that muscle paralysis during REM sleep.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So they actually act out their dreams. Sometimes it can be really dramatic, even dangerous.
So they're physically moving around while they're dreaming?
Yeah. And the interesting thing is that what they report dreaming about often matches up perfectly with what they were doing.
It's like the dream is spilling out into the real world.
Exactly. And that's more evidence that dreams are real experiences, not just stories we make up later.
So even though we might rely on dream reports to study dreams, all this other evidence from physiology and behavior really strengthens the case for dreams being genuine experiences.
Exactly. And philosophers often use this idea of inference to the best explanation. It basically means that the best way to explain all this evidence, the reports, the brain activity, the behavior, is to accept that dreams are real experiences that happen during sleep.
It's like all the pieces fit together.
Right.
Okay, so we've established that dreams are probably experiences. But what kind of experiences are they?
Right. The encyclopedia talks about dreams as being like hallucinations, illusions, and imaginative experiences.
Okay, let's break those down. What's the hallucination view?
So the basic idea is that dreams, like waking perception, they present us with things that seem to exist outside of our minds. We see objects, we hear sounds, we feel things. But unlike waking perception, in dreams, there's nothing actually there in the external world.
So it's like seeing something that doesn't exist.
Exactly. That's what a hallucination is. And even if you dream of being in your bedroom, if your eyes are closed, you're not actually seeing your bedroom.
Your mind is creating it.
Exactly. And this view of dreams as hallucinations, it goes way back, all the way to Aristotle. He thought dreams were basically leftover sensory activity from when we were awake.
So like after images of what we've experienced.
Kind of. And Descartes also talked about dreams as being like hallucinations. He even said, I seem to see light, hear a noise, and feel heat. This cannot be false, even though he knew those sensations weren't coming from anything real outside of his mind.
So he recognized that the feeling was real even if the source wasn't.
Right. And this idea of dreams and waking perceptions feeling similar, that's called phenomenological equivalence. You find it in philosophers like George Berkeley, Bertrand Russell, even David Hume.
So it's a pretty common theme in philosophy.
Yeah. And some philosophers, especially those who focus on phenomenology, they emphasize that feeling of being present in a world when you dream, that sense of immersion.
It's like you're really there.
Exactly. And that's different from just imagining something or daydreaming.
So the strong version of the hallucination view is that dreaming and waking perception are basically the same, not just in how they feel, but also in this me-in-a-world structure.
Right. And that's a key part of this virtual reality metaphor for consciousness, which says that consciousness itself is kind of like a dream. And there's some neuroscience research that actually supports this idea.
Like showing that similar parts of the brain are active when we're dreaming and when we're doing the same things while awake.
Exactly.
But the encyclopedia also says this strong hallucination view might be too simplistic. There might be differences between dreaming and waking perception that we're missing.
Right. For one thing, dreams are super diverse. Some feel very much like real perception. Others are more abstract and imaginative. And the details might be different too. Like visuals in dreams might be more vivid than touch. And even the visuals themselves, the colors, the background details, they might not be as rich as in real life.
It's like our dream senses aren't as sharp.
Maybe. And then the fact that the same brain regions are active for both imagining things and actually perceiving them, that makes things tricky. It's hard to tell what's really going on just from brain activity.
So the hallucination view captures that basic feeling of perceiving something that's not really there, but it might not be the whole story.
Exactly.
Okay, what about the illusion view? How is that different?
So the illusion view says that at least some dream images, they come from us misinterpreting a real stimulus, either from outside or inside our bodies.
So there's a real trigger, but our brains get it wrong.
Yeah. Unlike hallucinations where there's no external source, illusions are distortions of something real. This view isn't as popular these days, but it has an interesting history. Ancient people often thought dreams had direct bodily causes. Like Aristotle thought indigestion could cause dreams. And later, Thomas Hobbes linked specific dream themes to bodily sensations.
I read in the encyclopedia about this belief that dreams of flying were linked to how you were lying in bed.
Right. Or that dreams of being unable to move were caused by not actually moving while asleep. There was even this theory called the Leibniz theory, which basically means body stimulation theory. They did experiments to see how things like sounds or touch could influence dreams.
Wow. So trying to manipulate dreams through real-world stimuli.
Exactly. And some newer studies actually do show that things like light, sounds, touch, even words can make their way into our dreams. And even our own muscle movements during sleep can affect our dreams. Sometimes those tiny twitches we make while dreaming actually match up with what's happening in the dream. And sometimes sensations from our body can trigger specific images.
Like if your leg falls asleep, you might dream about wearing heavy boots.
Exactly. So these examples kind of fit the idea of an illusion. Your brain is taking a real sensation and twisting it into something else. But it's important to say that this doesn't mean all dreams are illusions.
Right.
It's more like a piece of the puzzle.
Okay, so hallucinations are about seeing things that aren't there, and illusions are about misinterpreting things that are there. What about the last category? Imaginative experiences.
So this is a big alternative to the hallucination view. It says that what happens in our dreams, the images, the events, they're more like acts of imagination than actual perception.
So our dreaming minds are kind of like storytellers.
Yeah. And this view can also apply to what we seem to believe in our dreams. Like those beliefs might be more like imaginative assumptions than real solid beliefs. One thing that's good about this view is that it connects dreaming to other things we do while awake, like daydreaming and fantasizing.
It makes dreams seem less alien, less separate from our normal mental life.
Exactly. And the encyclopedia talks about several ways that dreams are similar to imagination and different from real perception. One is this feeling of presence, that sense of really being in the dream world.
That feeling of actually being there.
Right. Some philosophers say the feeling is different in dreams compared to when we're awake. It's more like being engrossed in a good book or movie.
Okay.
Another difference is control. We usually think of imagination as something we control, but dreams often feel like they just happen to us.
Like we're along for the ride.
Exactly. But then again, there's lucid dreaming, where we can control things.
Yeah.
So that kind of complicates things.
It's like we have the potential for control, but we're not always using it.
Right. And then there's the fact that dreams are often vague and inconsistent. Details change, things don't make sense, unlike the real world, which is usually pretty stable.
Our dream logic is a bit wonky.
Yeah. And this ties into the debate about whether we dream in color.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that.
Some philosophers, like Eric Spitzgibbel, they think our dreams might actually be indeterminate when it comes to color, kind of like how we can imagine an object without picturing a specific color.
So our dreams might be in this blurry, in-between state of color and black and white.
It's possible. And this vagueness supports the idea that dreams are more like imagination than perception.
It's like our dream minds are sketching things out rather than painting a detailed picture.
Exactly. And this also connects back to Descartes and his skepticism. You know, he said we could use pain as a test to see if we're dreaming. If it hurts, it's real.
Pinch yourself to wake up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if the pain in dreams is different from real pain, if it's less intense or somehow not quite real, then maybe that's a clue that we're dreaming. And the philosopher John Locke actually suggested pinching yourself as a way to tell if you were dreaming.
It's a classic test.
It is. But if dream pain is different, that kind of weakens Descartes' argument.
It's like a built-in safeguard against being completely fooled by dreams.
Exactly. But then why do we use the same words to describe pain in dreams and in real life? It's a puzzle.
Maybe we're trying to make sense of something that's fundamentally different using the only language we have.
That's a possibility.
The encyclopedia also links this imagination view to some cognitive theories of dreaming. You know, ideas about how our brains actually create dreams.
Right. Like Robert Folks's idea that dreaming is basically thinking. Or G. William Domhoff's model, which focuses on how our dreams reflect our waking concerns and use the same mental skills we use when we're awake.
It's like our waking and dreaming minds are connected in ways we don't fully understand.
Exactly. And then there's this really interesting connection between dreaming and mind wandering.
Mind wandering, like when our thoughts just drift off.
Yeah. Researchers have found a lot of similarities between what happens in our minds when we're dreaming and when our minds are just wandering while we're awake. Some even think that dreaming is just a more intense form of mind wandering. Even the philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, centuries ago, noticed that dream images can be even more vivid than our waking imagination.
It's like our imagination goes into overdrive when we sleep.
Exactly. And the philosopher Thomas Metzinger, he connects both dreaming and mind wandering to this idea of a loss of mental autonomy. It's like we're not fully in control of our thoughts in either state.
Our minds have a mind of their own.
Right. But then again, there's lucid dreaming, where we can control things. So it's complicated.
There's always a twist.
Yeah. And I think this comparison between dreaming and mind wandering is helpful. It shows us that dreams might not fit neatly into just one category. They might be a bit of everything.
A hybrid of hallucinations, illusions, and imagination.
Exactly. And mind wandering itself is this broad category, so maybe it's a good way to think about the different things that can happen in our minds when we dream.
It's a more flexible approach.
Yeah.
Now, within this imagination view, there's this interesting question about what philosophers call dream beliefs. Like, are the things we believe to be true in our dreams actually beliefs in the same way as our waking beliefs?
Right. This is a big one for understanding the philosophy of dreaming. The argument is that what we experience as belief in a dream is more like we're just imagining something is true, rather than actually believing it.
Oh, it's not a real belief.
Exactly. Philosophers like Jonathan Ichikawa say that dream beliefs don't connect to our real-world perceptions and don't motivate us to act in the same way as waking beliefs do. They're often inconsistent, both within the dream itself and with what we believe when we're awake. And they don't change and adapt like our real beliefs do.
They're kind of like disposable beliefs.
In a way, yeah. And this distinction between dream and waking beliefs, it impacts that whole dream skepticism problem we talked about earlier.
How so?
Well, if we don't actually believe we're awake when we're dreaming, if we're just imagining it, does that make dream deception less of a problem?
It's like, if we're not really fooled, does it even count as deception?
It's a tricky question. But even if we're not forming false beliefs, we might still be misled about our own mental state. We might mistake those dream imaginings for real perceptions. And as the philosopher David Lewis pointed out, we can even have the thought within a dream that we might be dreaming.
Whoa, meta-dreaming.
Exactly. So we can be deceived about our awareness even within the dream.
It's like deception squared.
Yeah. So the question of dream belief is just as complicated as the question of belief itself.
It seems like with dreams, everything is more complex than it appears. Okay, let's move on to how dreams connect to the big picture of consciousness. The encyclopedia says that scientists often use dreams as a kind of model for studying consciousness.
Right.
Why is that?
Dreams are interesting for consciousness research because they're this naturally occurring state of consciousness that happens under very different conditions from our normal waking state. Our brain activity and behavior are different when we're dreaming.
So it's like a different mode of consciousness.
Exactly. And unlike other altered states, like those caused by drugs or medical conditions, dreaming is normal. That happens to pretty much everyone.
So it's a reliable way to study consciousness in a different form.
Right. And philosophers have different views on what dream consciousness is like. For example, Paul Churchland, he pointed out how bizarre and illogical dreams can be, and he argued that dream consciousness is probably very different from our waking consciousness.
Because it's less rational, less grounded in reality.
Yeah. But then you have Andy Ravenssuo. He actually argued that dreaming might be the purest form of conscious experience, precisely because it's not tied down by the real world.
So it's like our consciousness is unleashed in dreams.
Exactly. And that led him to this idea of consciousness as a world simulation, which basically says that consciousness is all about creating these immersive first-person experiences.
Like our brains are building virtual worlds.
Right. But other philosophers have challenged this idea that dreams are completely detached from the outside world.
Like Alvin Noé.
Yeah, he argued that a lot of what makes dreams different from waking experience, like the way they're unstable and don't always make sense, that comes from us not interacting with the real world while we're dreaming.
Our dream senses aren't getting any feedback.
Exactly. And Jennifer Wendt, she's argued that both the purely internal view and the purely external view of dreams are too simple. It's more complicated than that.
So, using dreams as a model for consciousness is tricky. We need to understand more about how dreams work before we can use them to understand consciousness as a whole.
Definitely. And speaking of understanding how dreams work, the encyclopedia also talks about predictive processing.
Predictive processing.
Yeah, it's this idea that our brains are always making predictions about what we're going to experience and then comparing those predictions to what actually happens. Perception is basically us adjusting our predictions based on those comparisons.
So we're constantly predicting and updating our model of the world.
Exactly. And some philosophers think that this same predictive process is involved in dreaming and imagination.
So dreaming is like a kind of prediction.
In a way, yeah. It might be our brain trying to make sense of internal signals and create a coherent story, even if that story ends up being pretty weird.
Because in dreams, there's no real-world feedback to correct those predictions.
Right. And Jennifer Wendt has also used predictive processing to explain our sense of having a body in dreams. She thinks that those bodily sensations we feel, even if they're not coming from the real world, help our brains maintain a model of our body.
It's like our dream selves need to feel like they have bodies, even if those bodies aren't real.
Exactly.
And what about phenomenal consciousness, that feeling of what it's like to experience something? How do dreams fit into that debate?
So there's this question of whether phenomenal consciousness, that raw feeling of experience,